If you love classic cars, dark automotive history, and that uncomfortable shock of realizing how much of normal life in the 1960s would get you fined, arrested, or sued today, this story is for you. This is not blind nostalgia. This is about the design failures that forced engineering to grow up. Today, we are climbing into a real American car from the 1960s. Not the perfect movie Mustang with flawless chrome and a spotless back seat. The real one, no seat belts. Sharp, exposed metal dashboard. Cigarette smoke baked into the headliner. A fuel tank hanging in a crush zone. Kids loose in the back seat, sometimes bouncing in the open bed of a pickup at highway speeds. A cold beer sitting between the front seats. Leaded gas fumes pouring straight out the tailpipe into the neighborhood air. Back then, that was sold as pure freedom. In 2025, a disturbing amount of that nostalgia is completely illegal in the United States. Some of it gets you a ticket. Some of it gets you points on your license. Some of it can get your car impounded, your insurance denied, or your name in a multi-million-dollar lawsuit. What they did back then is hard to believe now. So, let's walk through 15 habits and design choices that almost everyone accepted in the 1960s, but that can get you into serious trouble today. Stay with me until the end, because number 14 will surprise you, and along the way, I will show you exactly why the rules changed, how real crashes forced new laws, and how that shaped the cars you drive now. And if you want more stories like this, if you care about engineering that saves lives or fails loudly, hit subscribe on Remember That Car and turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next. Your subscription is what lets us keep digging up these buried truths. Let's go. Cars with no seat belts, or belts as optional toys. In the early 1960s, a huge number of American cars either had no seat belts at all, or only basic lap belts sold as an option most buyers skipped. For Detroit, belts were a problem. Belts suggested the car might not be safe. The three-point belt, the design we know today, already existed thanks to Volvo in 1959. Sweden was decades ahead on passive safety. In the US, that idea was seen as unattractive, uncomfortable, even bad for sales in a market built on style and horsepower. The ads showed full-width bench seats, families sliding around, kids on laps, nobody restrained. The message was simple. Freedom should not be strapped down. That attitude only changed under pressure. Starting with the 1968 model year Federal Standard FMVSS 208, required lap and shoulder belts in front outboard seats in new U.S. cars. Actual "you must wear it" laws came later, state by state, mostly in the 1980s when crash data was too brutal to ignore. Today, driving without a belt is illegal in all 50 states. In many, it is a primary offense. An officer can stop you just for that. Fines typically range from about $25 to a few hundred, sometimes with court costs and points. If the unbelted person is a child, penalties get much harsher. In the 60s, no belt was a vibe. Today, it is reckless on video, in the statute book, and in any courtroom. Safety engineering became law. Solid steering columns that could impale the driver. In many cars built before the late 60s, the steering column was literally a solid shaft. Think about that. A metal spear aimed straight at your chest. The engine was mounted solid. In a serious frontal crash, the engine could be shoved back, driving the steering column toward the driver in what safety investigators called steering column rearward displacement. The wheel that should guide you could become the weapon that kills you. This was standard engineering. Public pressure and crash data led to the National Traffic and Motor Vehicle Safety Act of 1966. After that, standards like FMVSS 204, limited how far the column could move rearward, and pushed manufacturers to adopt collapsible columns that absorb energy in a crash instead of delivering it into the driver's rib cage. Today, a car without an energy-absorbing steering column does not get certified. Selling a road car with a spear pointed at the driver would not just be criticized. It would be considered criminally negligent. Back then, it was normal. The forced redesign turned the steering wheel from a hidden threat into part of the protection system. Kids loosen the car, or riding in the bed of a pickup. If you grew up in the 60s, you remember this: a kid standing on the front bench, one hand on the dash. A baby stretched across a lap. Children lying on the rear parcel shelf under the glass. Teens bouncing in the open pickup bed at highway speeds. There were no federal standards for child restraints. Early car seats were basically thrones to keep kids from roaming, not devices to manage crash forces. The push for proper child safety laws came later, driven by brutal numbers on child fatalities. Today, every U.S. state has child passenger safety laws. They define age, height, and weight rules for rear-facing seats, forward-facing seats, boosters, and when a child can ride up front. Fines usually run from about $25 to $500 depending on the state and violation, sometimes with points. In a crash, breaking those rules can be used as evidence of negligence. Many states also restrict or ban minors in open pickup beds. Each child can count as a separate violation, and if someone gets hurt, charges can escalate. What was sold as childhood freedom is now recognized as a list of preventable injuries, beautiful but deadly dashboards, and steering wheels. Climb into a big 60s sedan, thin chrome horn ring, rigid metal spokes, painted steel dash, sharp knobs and edges right where your face and chest would go in a crash. It looked premium. It behaved like a trap. Safety advocates, including Ralph Nader in Unsafe at Any Speed, called these parts silent killers, and they were right. That pressure, backed by hospital data, helped drive standards like FMVSS 201, which required padded dashboards and interior surfaces that absorb energy instead of cutting people open. Today, dashboards, steering wheels, and pillars are designed to deform, to work with airbags, to reduce head and chest injuries. If a company tried to sell a new car with bare steel dash panels and knife-edge spokes, it would fail testing and get sued into oblivion. In the 60s, that was luxury. Now, it is a safety horror show. No headrests. Most 1960s seats had low backs. Smooth vinyl. No support for your head. In a rear-end collision, your torso is thrown forward. Then your head snaps back into empty space. Classic whiplash. Thousands of neck injuries with every decade. FMVSS 202, effective January 1st, 1969, required head restraints on front seats of new passenger cars. Today, head restraints are mandatory, measured and crash-tested. Without proper headrests, your design fails. What once looked like odd European furniture is now just standard survival gear. Fuel tanks sitting in the crush zone. In the 60s, it was common to stick the fuel tank behind the rear axle, under a thin trunk floor, in places with minimal structural protection. A hard rear impact could puncture fuel lines or the tank itself, turning a survivable crash into a fire. High-profile disasters in the 70s, like the Ford Pinto, made that layout infamous. Modern standards such as FMVSS 301 require fuel systems to withstand specific crash tests, front, side, and rear, with only tiny allowed leakage. Tanks now sit inboard, shielded by stronger structure, with reinforced lines and rollover valves. In the 60s, that risky layout was just how it's done. Today, it is engineering malpractice. Sharp hood, ornaments, and chrome spears. The jet age loved rockets, spears, birds, fins, and steel sculptures sticking off the hood. Modern rules focus more on pedestrian safety and general unsafe equipment. Anything rigid and sharp that could stab someone makes lawyers and regulators very nervous. Many brands killed the classic hood ornament. Others switched to flexible or spring-loaded designs that fold away on impact. What screamed status in 1962 reads like liability in 2025. Doors that flew open and no side impact protection. Many 1960s cars had weak latches and no side intrusion beams. In a crash, doors could pop open and throw unbelted people out. In other cases, the structure collapsed so badly rescuers could not open the doors at all. Today, side impact standards and latch requirements demand that doors stay shut during a crash yet remain operable afterward. Reinforcement beams are built into doors and pillars. Once, being thrown clear was weirdly called lucky. Now, it is a sign that the car and its maker failed. Smoking in the car, especially with kids. A 60s interior was built for smoking. Ashtrays in every door. Lighter in the dash. Smoke in the advertising photos. Nobody thought twice about lighting up with an infant in the back. Now, a growing list of U.S. states ban smoking in vehicles with minors present. Fines are usually between $25 and $250. Even where it is still legal, it is heavily stigmatized as secondhand smoke exposure. What smelled like normal car in 1965 is now viewed as toxic air in a metal box. Drinking while driving and the casual road beer. Driving drunk was not officially approved in the 60s, but the culture was loose. Open containers in the car were often legal. A driver with a beer in hand was waved off if he seemed fine. Limits for blood alcohol content were higher, unclear, or rarely enforced. Sobriety checkpoints were almost unheard of. From the late 70s onward, under pressure from groups like Mothers Against Drunk Driving, states tightened DUI laws, created broad open container bans, and standardized lower BAC limits, usually 0.08 for adults. Penalties now include heavy fines, license suspension, ignition interlocks, and jail time. That laid back, one hand on the wheel, one on the can look from the 60s is now solid evidence in court. Leaded gasoline everywhere. In the 1960s, if you were serious about performance, you ran high-octane leaded gasoline. It kept high-compression engines happy and valve seats alive. Nobody wanted to hear about brain damage or contaminated soil. As emission science advanced, the EPA began phasing down lead in the 1970s. By 1996, leaded gasoline for on-road vehicles was banned in the United States. Today, using leaded fuel on public roads is illegal. It survives only in a few aviation and racing niches, under constant scrutiny. The smell everyone remembers so fondly was literally neurotoxic exhaust. Open headers, straight pipes, and extreme exhaust noise. In the 60s, unmuffled exhaust on the street was part of hot rodding. Cutouts, straight pipes, glass packs, all of it. Cops might complain, but the culture mostly looked the other way. Today, many states and cities have explicit exhaust noise limits, often in the 80 to 95 decibel range depending on conditions. Violations bring fines from tens to hundreds of dollars. Some places are deploying automated noise cameras. Repeat offenders can see higher penalties. If you blast a wide-open big block through a modern downtown the way people did in 1968, do not be surprised if the soundtrack now comes with tickets. Toxic smoke and removing emission controls. In the 1960s, there were no catalytic converters, no oxygen sensors, no charcoal canisters. Engines ran rich. Valve seals leaked. Blue and black smoke were part of the scenery. Now, under the Clean Air Act, street-legal vehicles must have functional emission controls. Removing or bypassing a catalytic converter or similar device is illegal across the U.S. The EPA has gone after shops and tuners with civil penalties reaching thousands of dollars per tampered vehicle. Back then, smoke was called character. Now, it is a federal problem. Bald tires, bad brakes, and drive it till it breaks. Here is the one that quietly shocks people. In the 60s, it was common to drive on worn-out tires, weak brakes, leaking systems, cracked windshields, misaligned lights. Some states had inspections, many did not. If the car moved and sort of stopped, most people kept rolling. You never see that part in the vintage ads. But this is the behavior that fills police reports. Today, many states require regular safety inspections. Even where they do not, driving with bald tires, failing brakes, or obvious defects can be cited under unsafe vehicle laws. An officer who sees cords showing, missing lights, or serious cracks can pull you over, issue fines, or order the car off the road. If there is a crash and investigators find clear neglect, that becomes a major factor in civil liability and can become criminal negligence. What used to be, "I will deal with it later," is now a shortcut to getting blamed for everything. Overloading the car with people everywhere and no one buckled. The classic Sunday scene. 3 adults across the front bench, maybe with a child on a lap. 4 more crammed into the back. A kid sitting on the center hump. Someone lying in the cargo area of a wagon facing backwards, waving at traffic. No belts, no child seats, no problem. Today, seatbelt and child restraint laws make that setup absolutely illegal. Most states require 1 belt per occupant and that they be used. Carrying more people than you have belts for can get you cited. If an overloaded, unbelted car crashes, the legal fallout is harsh. Yesterday's family adventure is today's evidence file. Why does any of this matter for Remember That Car? Because this contrast is where the real engineering story lives. The 1960s gave us some of the most beautiful shapes and legendary engines ever built. They also gave us dashboards that broke faces, steering columns that pierced chests, fuel systems that turned crashes into fires, and habits that treated kids like cargo. What they did in the 60s is hard to believe now. That is exactly why it matters. When you set those images against modern laws and engineering, you understand why 3-point belts became mandatory over industry resistance. You see why headrests suddenly appeared in 1969. You see how scandals, crash tests, lawsuits, and activism pushed fuel tanks inboard, killed leaded gas, cracked down on loud exhausts, and made open containers and loose kids in cars unacceptable. And this is not just a safety lecture. This is storytelling fuel for our niche. If you are still here, you are the exact kind of viewer the algorithm usually hides when content stays on surface level, horsepower, and shiny paint. You care about how these machines were built, how they failed, and how those failures rewrote the rule book. So, here is what to do next. Subscribe to Remember That Car and turn on the bell so you do not miss the next chapters. We are going to take each of these "it was normal back then" habits and show you the photos, the regulations, and the forgotten test footage that forced change. Drop a comment telling us which of these 15 shocked you the most and what you remember seeing or doing that now feels insane. And keep watching, because in an upcoming episode we are going into the real stories behind the crashes and cover-ups that forced automakers to stop pretending and start engineering for survival. What they did in the 60s is hard to believe today, but understanding it is the only way to truly appreciate the cars we remember and the ones we survived.